We're going to allow another minute for folks to enter and then we'll get started.
Okay.
All right, let's do the ding dang thing. All right, well, this is very exciting. I got to meet the author today, so good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Kay from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Caitlin Barasch, presenting her new book, Untitled Obsession. She'll be talking with Raven Leilani, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Caitlin, Raven, and the team at Dutton for making this all happen, and to all of you for showing up. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. It's a great way to show your appreciation for our panelists and interact with fellow attendees. You can change the to setting to everyone so that you can interact with everyone who's here today and give a shout out, say where you're from, where you're tuning in from. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by our featured author, either of our panelists, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Untitled Obsession, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Caitlin's book and many others on site. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. And the buy link will be in the chat. As thanks for attending tonight's virtual event, we are offering 10% off the featured book. Enter coupon code GreenlightEvents10 into the coupon discount section at checkout online for 10% off. Caitlin has stopped by our store to sign copies of the book, so you can get a signed book by request while supplies last. Make sure to indicate your signed copy request in order comments at checkout when ordering online, or look for signed copies when you visit the store. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. Our interviewer tonight is Raven Leilani. Leilani's work has been published in Granted, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunctions, The Cut, and New England Review, among other publications. Leilani received her MFA from NYU. Luster is her first novel. She will be speaking with our featured author, Caitlin Barasch. Born and raised in New York, Caitlin earned her BA from Colorado College and her MFA from New York University, where she also taught creative writing. Her work has appeared in over a dozen publications and has been nominated for Best Small Fictions. A former bookseller, Caitlin is currently a creative writing instructor at the Writers Circle. Caitlin's new book, Untitled Obsession, is a wry and bold debut novel, which is at once an irresistible catastrophe waiting to happen and an unflinching exploration of how we narrate the stories of our lives as an aspiring novelist finds herself stalking and writing about her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. Caitlin is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then we'll be talking with Raven and with all of you. So please take it away, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's funny, things are of course reflected in my glasses, which I have to use to read from the actual book. So once again, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to be doing this event with Raven, one of my closest friends, and also just bomb ass writer herself. So this is really fun for me. And without further ado, I'm going to read a short passage from the first chapter, keeping it simple. My boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, Rosemary, has the same thickness to her eyebrows as I do, the same wavy auburn hair and pear-shaped hips. I'm standing across the street from her office in a chunky maroon sweater and sunglasses, watching her leave. I want to know if she's the type who heads out at 5 for a gym class or a happy hour, or the type to send emails until 8, adrift in a sea of empty desks. Watching her exit the building at 6:35 p.m., I've now discovered she's neither. I note the New Yorker tote bag she carries, which to me suggests unoriginality, conformity. She crosses the 4-lane street with only 2 seconds left on the crosswalk's countdown. Cars honk, she pops a breath mint. I know it's a mint because I stand close to her on the Fulton subway platform and breathe it in. I resist the urge to touch her, to see if she dissolves. Up close, Rosemary looks different from her Instagram photos. She must use a variety of filters, excessive shadow and saturation. She has a flatter stomach than I do, but much smaller breasts. Smooth and glowing skin, but a square and masculine jaw. In the pictures I've seen, she presses her lips together rather than flashing all her teeth, as I do. But now, finally, I have a rare glimpse of those teeth. The canines are jagged, protruding like fangs. This might mean I'm prettier than Rosemary, but who knows? Maybe her vampiric teeth appeal to Caleb. On the train, when she shoves tiny white AirPods into her ears, I mimic her with my bulky noise-canceling headphones. Even though seats are available, Rosemary leans against the door and closes her eyes and taps her feet. I prefer to stand too, but only ever with my eyes open. Hidden behind dark, oversized sunglasses, similar to the kind celebrities wear when evading paparazzi, I'm able to hold prolonged and one-sided eye contact with strangers. Successful surveillance relies on anonymity. A platoon of bodies in 2-piece business suits shoves into the train at Wall Street, and those huddled near the door squeeze closer together. Despite October's cold snap, the subway cars aren't heated yet. I manage, in the scuffle, to stand next to Rosemary. When the sleeve of my sweater grazes her denim jacketed elbow, I wonder if we'll look at each other, but her gaze never rises. Being 2 inches taller proves an advantage. I'm able to peer at her screen as she scrolls through artists and albums, finally settling on Hiatus Coyote's Breathing Underwater. With a twinge of discomfort, I realize Caleb, my boyfriend, her ex, has blasted this song every time we've cooked together the past few weeks, chopping onions to the smash of a cymbal. Next, I observe Rosemary tweet about a novel she edited, which was apparently reviewed in the New York Times. She deletes and rephrases so many times that I'm tempted to rip the phone from her hands. I know you're aiming for pride and humility, I'll say. Let me. I study her face until she exits at Atlantic Avenue near Brooklyn's Fort Greene neighborhood. I follow her. She walks down the street, takes a left, a right, then punches in a code to enter a modern industrial chic building with floor-to-ceiling glass windows. It's an eyesore among the brownstones. I can't follow anymore. I go instead to a beer garden a few blocks away, order a pretzel the size of my face, drink seasonal beer that tastes of banana bread. Then I call Caleb and ask if he wants to meet me here. Where, he asks. I cover the mouthpiece and ask the bartender to tell me where I am. He whispers the name of the bar and winks. I repeat it for Caleb. There's a decided pause. Why are you in Fort Greene? I'm writing a scene that takes place here. Research. His voice softens. Be there soon. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, still the same chapter, to sort of the next stalking episode, so to speak, with Naomi and Rosemary. 2 days later, on my day off, I return to the corner where Rosemary works and locate a bench where I can read. I'm carrying a book she edited called One of the Herd. an essay collection by a woman who grew up on a Wyoming cattle farm. I took it from a box of forthcoming releases in the storage room at the bookstore where I work. The publication date is still a few weeks away, but I've promised myself I'll skim quickly and carefully without damaging the pages or the spine, and then slide it back into the box before it goes on sale. I want to claim this physical manifestation of her, if only for a short while. Between surveillance of the building's revolving doors, I managed to digest 32 pages before Rosemary emerges, rummaging in her New Yorker tote for her Ray-Bans. She turns west at the corner. I slip the book into my own tote, its illustration a bespectacled woman carrying a teetering stack of Jane Austen novels, just in time to watch the back of Rosemary's royal blue cotton dress disappear inside a cafe. I'm thirsty too, I realize, and in need of caffeine. So I follow her inside. Rosemary ponders the chalkboard menu. Does she read every item but then order the usual? I peg her as a non-fat latte kind of woman. I'll have an iced dirty chai, please, she tells the barista. That's what I always get, I murmur, more audibly than intended. Rosemary turns. I'm mortified, but also electric. Words bubble up. I rarely see anyone order it, I blurt out, as if to explain. But I know people like it. That's how I found out it existed. I can't seem to stop. Espresso and chai. Furious at the brutal mundanity of what is now officially our first encounter, I blush a deep crimson. Then Rosemary says, yeah, it's pretty good. Her gaze sweeps over me. Cute tote, by the way. Her voice is raspy, lower than I expected, alluring. I glance down. Thank you so much. I want to hear her again, but she ducks her head to check her phone, signaling the end of our conversation. The espresso machine gurgles. The barista hands her the chai. Rosemary's fingernails are violet, and then her mouth encircles the straw. I order the same, still vibrating with nervous energy, and step into the bright October sunlight. Rosemary is gone. I was prepared to wait all day for her emergence, but now I don't know what to do with all this extra time. I walk a few avenues over and sit alongside the Hudson, zipping my floral print bomber jacket up to my chin. The seasons are changing, ushering in peak foliage. Golden leaves litter the sidewalk. The wind is biting when it blows. I no longer apply deodorant to the insides of my thighs to prevent them from chafing. In my iPhone Notes app, I document a few details. The blue cotton dress, the raspy voice, our dirty chai, her violet fingernails. Later, I'll sculpt a scene. It's only a few minutes before 11. Apparently, Rosemary takes early coffee breaks. Maybe she brewed her first cup around dawn and drank it slowly in her kitchen, savoring the steam. Maybe her routine involves grabbing another coffee before boarding the subway and then attempting to drink it jostled against the other commuters. And finally, when pre-lunch fatigue sets in, she ventures out for her third cup. I drink coffee all day too, hoping it will successfully jolt me into action. Perhaps we also have dehydration in common. Or it's possible Rosemary enjoyed a late night with friends yesterday, maybe even a date. She might have been naked in another man's bed this morning. But I can't imagine why a woman in love with someone else would send her ex-boyfriend, Caleb, an email asking if he was well, asking to see him again. What could require they meet face to face, other than a desire to repair and rekindle? That's partly why I'm here, to find out. A narrative is beginning to form, one in which I am braver, bolder, more reckless. Observations are useless without accompanying actions. Maybe I should have spilled coffee on her tote, cried uncontrollably about a pretend breakup to elicit her concern, stolen a bag of coffee grounds and made a run for it. Motivated by a commitment to my craft, I'm free now to make strange decisions emancipated from social convention. Welcome to my intellectual experiment. Welcome to my ambition. Who would dare fault me for my ambition? I'm gonna stop there.
Katie, that was so beautiful. For everyone who might not know who's here, Katie and I were, in the same cohort in the MFA, and so I watched these pages come together, and so it's really special hearing kind of snippets of things that I've read before in its full form. It's really beautiful, and I feel like that passage is kind of a good lead-in to what I immediately want to talk about with your book, which is Fixation and Obsession. I think as we were workshopping and you were writing your book, we talked about limerence, which is just like like expert level obsession, fixation. It's almost a kind of like obsession that's almost intrusive. So I wanted to talk about that in your reading. You really capture the kind of eroticism of that close one-sided surveillance, although Naomi has more extremity, I think, than just that. So I wondered if you could talk more about that like obsession and limerence, especially between two women.
Yeah, so you did read so many of these pages when they were like very unformed, and it is so cool that we're doing this today. But yeah, it always started, it's funny, the first chapter that I just read to you guys, obviously it has in many ways transformed over the course of many years, but I always started with that scene. The first page was always Naomi watching Rosemary from across the street as she exited a building. So I just always wanted to start on this like very creepy, eerie tone, but just throw people into the action right away. And that felt really natural to me, maybe a bit too natural. It's like, okay, we're just gonna go right into it. But that sort of, that feeling of no longer saying no to the things that you're obsessed with and not saying no to the impulses that you have really fascinated me. Like, this whole book was sort of born on like a what if thought experiment, essentially. What if my character did all of these crazy things that we're not really allowed to do in real life for good reason? And so it really ballooned quite organically from there to sort of capture this obsessive fixation with Rosemary, who I think in so many ways represented what Naomi sought, which is one, a job that Naomi thought was pretty cool. I think I loved my job as a bookseller. I think Naomi really loves her job as a bookseller, but I think in some weird way, she believes that Rosemary has sort of ascended in some sense. And she's still kind of post college graduation floundering. She doesn't know what she really wants to do. Bookselling gives her a lot of purpose. And so she's continuing with that and really loving that aspect of the literary world. That she's able to sort of be on the ground floor of, so to speak, because it does feel like you're on the ground floor and you get to see everything. And, you know, the sort of backstage part of the literary world is what I at least got from working at a bookstore. But I think it became really natural for Naomi to just continually up the ante with her obsession. And specifically, and I like that you said the sort of erotic obsession, because I don't think it ever really occurs to her that it could be that when it so clearly is in so many ways. Because in a sense, not only is Rosemary someone she admires, but it's also someone she feels very threatened by. And there's always that sense, that push and pull of wanting to be someone or wanting to sort of eradicate them so you can take their place. And so I feel like throughout, she's constantly confused by her own motivation for her obsession. And I hope as the book goes on, like I wanted that obsession to actually become even murkier for her and murkier for a reader perhaps as well, which was sort of also my intention. I didn't really want to pathologize her obsession, which I think you sort of were picking up on in that way. Like I've had some readers that are like, so what mental illness does she have? That just feels inappropriate and irrelevant. But essentially, I just felt like I really wanted to explore that murky obsession that we have with the women in our lives, or in some ways, this is not a woman in her life. This is a woman that she's forcing into her life and intruding on Rosemary's life rather than the other way around. But I think it was more interesting to me than just a straightforward love story. And we're probably not going to talk about him much because he's not as important. But Caleb is sort of, you know, the boyfriend that inspires this deep dive into his past. I mean, she finds out that Caleb's ex-girlfriend lives in New York, works in the literary world. That freaks her the hell out because she thought she was unique. It's New York. I don't know why she thought that, but she's like, I'm the only literary girl in New York. It's not allowed. And so I feel like instead of wanting to sort of explore her relationship with Caleb and how that escalated and how that deepened, I was way more interested in sort of the story of her and this burgeoning relationship, friendship with Rosemary that is of course begun, you know, with deceptive pretenses, but that in some ways, like as maybe we'll discuss and as readers have been seeing, does sort of, you know, become genuine and authentic in certain ways, while at the same time still having this sort of cloud of that initial deception that sort of hangs over it throughout. But Yeah.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Do I want to be you or do I want to eradicate you? I think eradicate is the word. And that kind of the friction between those two is a really interesting kind of like romance that can develop between women. But there also is the aspiration of art. Rosemary is sort of more solidly situated in this world that she wants to be a part of. And so like there's a part that's kind of like an art crush. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about like the way her artistic aspirations, her wanting to write, have kind of tendrils in this.
Yeah. And so I mean, what is even a spoiler anymore? But without sort of going too far into what eventually happens and the things that Naomi discovers about Rosemary, but there is a point in this book where they do talk quite candidly about the work that they're making. They're both, involved in the literary world, as we've already discussed, and Naomi is an aspiring writer. And she, at one point in the book, like they have a very honest and candid conversation about the work that they're each making. And that comes as kind of a surprise to Naomi and hopefully also to the reader at a certain point in the book. But I feel like I have had a billion art crushes in my own life. So it was very easy to write that in. And I feel like, and maybe we've already talked about this, Raven, offline, but I feel like it's a really interesting moment when you meet someone in the context of an art class, a writing class, or even a literature course at school, where you just are obsessed with the way their brain works and the things they say, the things that they write. And that can sort of elevate them in your mind, even if you wouldn't normally get along in the real world. Like even if your personalities like clash, you can still sort of meet each other on this other plane that becomes an art crush, which is why I love that phrase. But it can also sometimes go the opposite way as well. Like if you meet someone that you really like and then their writing doesn't move you, it is so crushing because you're like, no, this was so perfect. Like, I don't know. But I think for Naomi and Rosemary, I don't think that their relationship would have taken flight in any way if there wasn't some sort of mutual respect or mutual admiration at some point throughout the novel, because I do think it is very hard for two artists to like show up authentically with one another unless they in some way, they don't need to like what the other person is doing, but they need to at least respect it and sort of understand where that person is coming from artistically. And so that was really interesting to me as well when I was creating these two characters. But yeah, I think Naomi doesn't realize that so much of what is driving her obsession is this art crush, so to speak. She's really moved by what Rosemary shares with her later on in the book. And that becomes, once again, like the same question that she asks herself, oh God, do I want to be you or do I want to eradicate you? Because there's a sense of, oh no, now not only as a person, not only as a romantic rival, but also as sort of someone who is doing the work I'm doing out in the world, and perhaps is a more evolved artist on her own terms, which is so in that way, Naomi sort of covets what she has in so many different ways. It sort of just keeps ballooning and complicating in that way, which was quite fun to write.
So I did want to talk more about the stalking and how it happens. And so you use social media in this book in like a really, really canny way. And I feel like we're often having conversations now, especially about its place in literature, which is a kind of big, broad question. But I wondered if you had any thoughts as you were writing about executing that particular angle in the book.
Yeah, I know it's so interesting because I feel like so many articles these days are sort of talking about the internet novel as a concept, and I've read several of them at this point. And it's so interesting because in my mind, like with this book, I felt like I couldn't write a contemporary novel without engaging with social media. It just felt inauthentic if I had avoided it, unless it was sort of a character trait. Like if the characters were avoiding it purposefully, that does, in a sense, become a character trait now. Like if someone tells me they're not on Instagram, I'm like, I respect that so much, but I'm also, how did you do that? How did you manage to escape that fate? So if anyone out there is not on social media, good for you. But I really wanted to sort of capture that sense of constant surveillance, the kind of surveillance that we're not even aware of. And I think there's so many different kinds of surveillance in this book. Like we get that first page with Naomi quite literally surveilling Rosemary from behind extremely tacky sunglasses, and following her home, essentially performing a stakeout. But then you also have her surveilling Rosemary online. And those two things, I mean, they're sort of synonymous in this way. Like I think it can feel like internet stakeouts are they a phrase? Because they should be. Because, I mean, who among us hasn't done that? So I feel like with social media, I really wanted to sort of explore how so many different kinds of social platforms can be used to gather more information. Because, at the end of the day, I think Naomi is crafting a character. I mean, she's writing about Rosemary as she's stalking her. And I think as she's trying to craft this version of Rosemary on the page, she's gathering information that she wouldn't necessarily have access to even from a friendship, even from the friendship that she's trying to develop with her. So like, for example, I think there's a moment in the book where I use a sort of Venmo-like app. And, I really wanted to do that because I just think it's hilarious how so many of us just are public on Venmo. I mean, I was public on Venmo at the beginning of my Venmo usage, but then when I started paying my therapist on Venmo, I was like, this feels wrong and I am shutting this down. I am going private. Not like, what would you even write in the caption of paying a therapist? Like crisis or something. So people just use emojis. They say rent. So you like know who's living with who. I mean, we've all seen the Venmo timeline. And it is horrifying because you just learn so much about people from their most intimate transactions. So I just knew I needed to write about that, and wanted to write about that because I think it's batshit, but also fascinating, like what we choose to share on Venmo versus perhaps like if you have a private Instagram, like what narrative are you trying to craft about yourself in that way? Or are you just totally unaware that people can see your Venmo transactions? In which case, go change that to private. Right now, no one wants to see that, or do they? But I really just wanted to explore like all the ways in which we could gather information on people. And I put that in the book because I find it fascinating, and pretty much everything that I find fascinating or mystifying ends up in the book in some capacity. But I think to your original question, like how just social media and literature in general, I think we had this conversation maybe in a class at NYU. I forget which class, but we were sort of talking about how plotting has changed with social media, because there's certain plot points in classic novels that basically hinge on withheld information, and information that you would only find because a letter was burned, and then later you find, I don't know, they send another letter. I don't know. I'm even thinking about, this is the lamest example, but like The Notebook. I'm just thinking of Noah and Allie and like all I love this movie. No one can come at me for loving this movie. When Allie's mom like basically keeps the pile of letters, and I feel like now Noah would just slide into her DMs and been like, "You getting my letters?" So and that would totally take all the air out of it, because we no longer have that anticipation and suspense. I mean, she literally marries someone else because she didn't get his letters. So anyway, I digress. But I feel like in that capacity, we're sort of having to come up with, or as writers, we're sort of having to come up with new ways to sustain tension, which is difficult in so many ways. It's like when we have immediate access to everything on the internet and or in someone's Instagram, you can learn so much, and it sort of, is a bit of an impediment to sort of having that surprise of withheld information. So it was really fun for me to figure out how I could do that while using social media. I think I was mostly successful with that, but it was just fun. It was a lot of fun because I think it's so often the ways that we are in the world these days. And I really wanted to explore like the way that I do exist on my screen way too often. I get screen alerts all the time saying like my screen usage was up, and it's very demoralizing. But yeah, I had a really fun time sort of thinking through all the different ways in which these characters could sort of function on and offline.
Right. And I mean, it changes plotting and craft, like you say, but it also changes how the allowances we might make for Naomi stalking. and
Yes.
impacting these things, because the information is way more readily available. It reminds me sort of the way, and I don't even know if this is true, but this is just something I heard growing up, the idea of a purse that is unzipped that appears to be open is a purse that is more readily stolen from.
Oh my God.
I don't know if that's true, but the idea is that you can potentially see someone sending money to their therapist on Venmo, and it's accessible in a different way. And so the stalking itself is kind of, I don't know, it's couched in a different way.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm super surprised by like how many people have just, because I think that's what's been so exciting about the premise for me as a writer, but also with readers, and just that idea that like we've all done the like sneaky look, but just where does it go from there? How can it escalate? Which it does.
But I do want to talk more about craft and about characters doing things versus just thinking about doing things, and how to strike a balance, which is absolutely one of my Achilles heels. I think it's really, really easy to kind of get lost in like kind of an abstract mood. But I feel like you have an incredible balance of having kind of concrete details and also having that interiority. So I wondered how you went about that.
Yeah, well, thank you. No, it was really important to me because I think so many novels I've read that I really admire, are so, I love really cerebral novels where characters don't do anything and the entire book is them just thinking about something. And I love that. It can be my kryptonite in so many ways. But when I started writing, that just didn't come naturally to me. I mean, I loved spending time in Naomi's head when I was in her head. Also, it's a terrifying place to be. Her head is very scary at times. She's very unsettling. I had to like take a breather, a cold shower, all of the above when I was writing her. But I think I was really going with her. I was really interested in her impulse control issues, like her inability to sort of think before she leaps. I think that's a bit of a mixed metaphor there, but she basically she thinks later. Like there's so much moralizing that she does after the fact, where she's like, I can't believe I did this, or I have to justify this to myself somehow, but she never really does that before she acts. And I found that was just literally more fun to write on the page for me, having her act first and think later, because in a way, as a writer, I also was thinking over my character's actions after the fact, like especially in the revision process. It was sort of asking myself, okay, she did this, but why? And I just kept asking myself why, but the why could never really preempt the doing. And in that way, I really admire writers who can do both, but I also really admire writers who stay in a character's head and make that seem like the most exciting action-packed thing ever. But for me, I think I've just always really been interested in action verbs, and like quite literally in verb. And I think the reason this particular book works for me is, well, it has to work for me. I wrote it, but is because I just really leaned into the doing, and the thinking came later. And that was both in the writing, but also in the way that her character works on the page. Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay, so very short question. Would Naomi stalk Rosemary if she wasn't a writer?
Yeah, see, I love this question because like what's so funny about it is that Rosemary and Naomi, like so much of their identity is, or especially Naomi's, her identity is writing, and she uses writing as a justification metric for the stalking. And in that way, I think this is also sort of an interesting, perhaps too vulnerable look into my writing process in the very beginning, but Naomi wasn't always a writer. And maybe you'll remember this from early drafts. Like she was always a bookseller, but I think in the beginning, she wasn't as ambitious of a writer, or writing wasn't sort of, wasn't her justification metric. It was just that she was insecure and crazy. But I remember in workshops, oftentimes the question was why? Why this? Why is she doing this? Like, why is a seemingly like functional person in society taking these really drastic measures to follow this woman and infiltrate her life? And in that way, I just felt like as I was writing, it just sort of clicked, because at the time I was also struggling with what to write about and what felt important to write about, what I really wanted to say, what I was most excited about on the page. And so I feel like making her a writer, it was fraught because there were definitely some people who were like, oh no, don't make her a writer. That's going to get too meta. But I feel like I just leaned into the meta-ness of it and had a blast doing so. And it became so central to her character that I now can't imagine her being anything else. But to literally answer your question, yes, I do think she would have found a way to stalk Rosemary, and she just would have used a completely different justification metric, because I think at that point she was too far gone. Once again, like her impulses were that she needed to gather information about Rosemary, that she needed to sort of suss her out. She didn't know why, other than the fact that she felt slightly threatened and slightly intrigued. And sort of as, the pages actually turn, she starts to say, well, I can at least say that I'm doing this because I'm writing about it. If it eventually gets written, then it's sort of a sacrifice that I'm making for art, which in a sense is like incredibly pretentious and self-absorbed and crazy. But at the same time, I mean, who hasn't as an artist sort of felt that, or at least used the art as an excuse for something, whether or not it's to withdraw from social life, from one's social life, or to sort of, say, yeah, I'm an eavesdropper. I eavesdrop on the train and I'm doing it for art. Just like all manners of bad behavior can occasionally be, sacrificed to the giant, maw of art. And I really wanted to explore that gone totally awry. But yeah, I think she would totally stalk her, even if she wasn't a writer, because she would just find another way to sort of justify her actions to herself.
Just as a reminder, send some more questions in. We already have like a good amount, but if you have any questions, now's a good time to pop them into the Q&A box. So I wondered if you could talk more about Naomi's family, especially her grandmother, and their influences on her.
So I love Naomi's grandmother. She's probably my favorite character. And she's actually also, I think she's also my editor's favorite character. Like a lot of people love Grammy. So Grammy, for those who haven't read the book yet, is also a writer, has also been a quite successful writer, and has been sort of Naomi's most stalwart champion of her writing, and of also the sacrifices that one makes for your writing. And she sort of consistently gives Naomi permission to essentially continue with her bad behavior in order to write a book that she is proud of. Because throughout this book, she is trying to literally write a novel, hence a novel obsession. And I think Grammy is someone who understands the way that the world has been, understands what it means to be an artist, because she's been quite a successful one on her own terms. She's a television writer and also wrote a memoir. And consistently, Naomi only feels seen by the grandmother and only feels like she's truly given permission by the grandmother. The grandmother is also the only person she can be really fully honest with. And even then, I feel like there's still, it's almost like an iceberg of honesty, and some of it's still submerged, and she can't always, I think she probably is more honest with her Grammy than anyone else in the novel, but at the same time, there's parts of her that she feels are too dark even to share with the person that loves her the most. And that, I think is one of the more tragic parts of the book, I think, is her sort of inability to be honest with the people that love her and will love her unconditionally. I think she sort of believes that love is conditional, but even with Grammy, I think Grammy's the only person that she truly believes loves her unconditionally. And it's really important to her that she has this, this figure in her life who has been a successful artist and can sort of give her permission to do whatever she needs to do in the service of that, even if it means, hurting the people in her life. Which, we could argue that is not great advice, but it is the advice she has given, and is the advice that she clings to. And also, because I may or not have anticipated this question, I'm literally going to plug my grandfather's memoir, because he's a real life playwright. He's no longer with us, but I recently reread it. It's called The Joy of Laughter. I don't know if you can see. He self-published it because he was getting much older in his life, and he just wanted it out there. He wanted to leave behind a legacy that was not only his family and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but also this actual evidence of a life lived. And I mean, I'm probably biased because I'm his granddaughter, but I think this book is hilarious because he was a comedy writer for decades and made a living as a writer, which not many people can say. And so he was a big inspiration for the character of Grammy. And my grandma as well, who is no longer with us either, was also a huge inspiration. So I feel like I kind of combined all of my grandparents and their personality quirks and career paths into sort of one Frankenstein's monster grandma character. But I think she was really special to me as a character, not only because she's special to Naomi, my protagonist, but also because I just really wanted to kind of pay homage to them and their influence on me throughout my writing life. So yeah, the joy of laughter. If you're in the mood for laughter, I recommend it.
You can feel that in the book. And I feel like when you're writing or you're reading a story about an artist, you know, or aspiring artist, person who's coming into themselves, it's always interesting for me to see where the seed is.
Yeah.
You can see that in the text. I just have, I think, one more question before we have to turn to audience questions. So I'm gonna jump to, I think, a question that a lot of us are probably curious about, and something I'm always interested in, which is the writing of sex and how you felt executing that in the book, how your feelings in general about sex writing and fiction, and it can be polarizing. So I wonder what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had so many of these conversations as well that I was so interested in tuning into, because some of the craziest questions about that. But yeah, well, one, sex is life, so you kind of have to write about it. But I was never interested in writing like sexy sex scenes because that's not fun. I think we probably both agree on this, definitely agree on this. And I think so much of the sex in this book is awkward. It's done with a very clear psychological agenda. Like, so much of it, I think, for Naomi at least, is kind of her trying to prove something to herself and prove something to the people that she's having sex with, that she is worthy of whatever love could exist during the act, which, you know, in some ways could be nothing. But I feel like there is there is a moment when you're with another person in that raw and vulnerable way where like the possibility for love exists in that moment, regardless of whether or not it actually manifests. I think there's always something very exciting about the first time that you sleep with someone, because you just have no idea like what is going to come of it. Unless you know going in, nothing is going to come of it. But for Naomi, I think also, and this is like a slight spoiler, but I feel like so many people have probably read the book already, but or maybe I shouldn't say this, but there is something that with Naomi's body that comes up in the book, and it is directly related to sex and to the idea of a legacy, and also directly related to her obsession and desperation to make art and to leave behind something lasting. And so I think in so many ways, the sex for her is kind of done out of spite in a lot of ways, and not spite toward the person that she's sleeping with, but spite towards herself in a sense. And I don't think I really even articulated that to myself as I was writing until I sort of sat with my pages and realized that that was what it was in a lot of ways, and this sort of conquering spirit that she had. But I did enjoy writing those scenes because I felt like they always served a purpose, or at least that was my goal. I wanted the sex scenes to serve a purpose. And I sort of stand by all of them. But it's interesting because I've definitely I never heard of this phrase before, but I've encountered it a lot recently. The idea of open door sex scenes in literature versus closed door. Yeah. And I was like, why is there such a thing as closed door? Like, I understand in television, you know, it's like if it's on prime time and it's PG, like you
pan away.
You pan away. They're like gently kissing and caressing, and then all of a sudden it's just like, and music, and the next morning orange juice and pancakes, and it's just like, well, but this is a book. Like you can't fade to black. So I always just wanted to quite literally finish the scene. That was a terrible joke, but I'm glad you laughed. Thank you. But I think some people have been like, you know, and I'd say some people, some readers do prefer closed door literature, which is their prerogative. If you are one of those readers, you will not like my book, because there are no closed door sex scenes. But it was an interesting concept. I was very fascinated by this concept. because I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I even think that it doesn't necessarily even have to serve a purpose. It can just be scintillating. It can just be hot, like, but I am always interested in hearing writers talk about like how their sex scenes are functioning. And on that note, I think we're gonna turn to audience questions. We have a few. So one question, thank you for writing such a compelling story. Was there anything about writing that surprised you during the process?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, it's funny, like I did write this book over the course of 5 years. So a lot of times over the course of drafting it, I had to pivot. There were a lot of pivots during the revision process with other amazing readers, including Raven, where I sort of had to come to terms with the fact that certain things about the story weren't working. I think one of those moments, and you know, it's a bit of a spoiler, but once again, what even is a spoiler in literary fiction? But essentially, one of the things that wasn't working was Rosemary's character. She wasn't being activated in that initial draft. There was something about their relationship that felt flat. And I couldn't figure out why. It took me a really long time to figure out why. And then I realized it's because there was no like real stakes or friction to Rosemary's perception of Naomi. And I think so much of that came from Rosemary revealing partway through the book that she also has writing aspirations. And I think that really throws Naomi for a loop because she's sort of willfully believing that she is the only writer in the book, you know, other than her grandmother. And obviously there's like millions of writers running around New York City, running around the world. But I think for Naomi to sort of be so laser focused in her justification metric, she sort of completely disregarded the fact that Rosemary could have similar aspirations. And when that is revealed and they sort of begin to share that part of themselves, that really suddenly clicked for my own writing of Rosemary. And she became much more exciting to write. Their dynamic became much more exciting to write, felt much more alive to me. And that was a big surprise because that switch came in like the 11th hour, like right before I signed with my agent. My agents, I had made that change. So it was definitely a late change that I'm really glad I made.
We have a question from our friend Angela.
Hi, Angela.
If a novel obsession were made into a movie, what kind of movie do you envision it being?
That is a great question. And like prayers, let's hope that happens. That would be really great and really fun. I could see it as, I feel like I'm woefully, I'm not great with cinematic language, but I could see it as this sort of incredibly like Ingrid Goes West type of film. I loved that film. I just feel like it would have to be incredibly, I keep thinking about this a lot because so much of the book is in Naomi's head. And I think there are so many interesting ways that cinema manages to sort of get characters out of their heads and either, not even through voiceover, but through really interesting images, through, perhaps like interesting camera angles. I don't know. Once again, I'm showing how little I know about the making of film, but I just think it would be really fast paced, really dark, really bonkers. Those are my wishes. Those are my prayers for the Novel Obsession movie. But because I actually have discussed this with the folks that have optioned the book, is that, we've been talking through, TV series or movie. And I think so much of what I think is exciting about my book is like, it is quite fast paced. I like to think that it can be read in a sitting. It's not incredibly long. A lot of things happen. And so I think wanting to kind of keep that compression. So a movie that is not very long and sort of has that fast-paced, compressed quality, I think would be more successful. But what am I to know about this? I'll leave that to the film industry if this ever gets made. Thank you, Angela.
We have a question about our writing friendship. Might the two of you talk about your writing friendship? Do you comment on each other's works in progress at this point? I'll just start. Like, yeah. Katie and I met in 2017, I think at this point,
Yes.
which is crazy. And at the very first workshop, and it was history from there.
She's wearing a beautiful red dress. I can't believe that, but of course I do.
That's wild. And I feel like, so we both watched each other write our first books. So we've seen all the drafts. We've done all the markups and cried all the tears. And I, when I'm working on something, I feel like you get like tiny bits and pieces. I don't really talk as much about it, but Katie is definitely like, she's an incredible eye to have, an editor. Like even not just for me, like in workshops, she was just like, she could see the things that were working like very, very, very easily. But that is sort of like how we met, and I think that's my side of it.
Well, I would echo all of that. No, it was always, we got really lucky because we were in most of our workshops together. And I remember the first time that you ever submitted a chapter of Luster, and I like lost my shit. And everyone was talking about it before class. Like we couldn't even wait to get into the class to talk about it. And I remember it so well because it was called something different. Another, like both titles were bangers. Like Luster is
You're the only one that thinks so.
I know, I love that title, but also I think Luster is definitely like snappier. So I can see why it's called Luster. And now I feel like I can't get that out of my head. It's just always going to be Luster to me. But I feel like we just really did it. And you did things in sequence. Like you would submit a chapter and then submit the next chapter. It felt like Dickens. You were like throwing us the Dickensian chapter by chapter, and we were all like eating out of your hand. But no, it was wonderful. And I mean, likewise, our writing friendship has honestly been, I mean, it's the two of us and then like so many other people in our MFA cohort, including Angela, shout out, who just asked that question. Probably so many of you here tonight who have sort of been with us through thick and thin, to use a cliche, sorry. And I don't think I would have made it to this point without Raven and without our other MFA friends. And it's sort of incredible. That's why it actually blows my mind to think of telling our 2017 selves that we would like, one day you'd be moderating my debut and your debut would have been out for 2 years. Like all of it is very surreal and crazy. And I will probably just like, my lullaby will be our Zoom event from now on. So but it was us and we did it together. But no, I mean, I think Raven's feedback on this novel in particular really always made it better. Like just because also I think you were, and I think this is probably like sort of common knowledge, is that you weren't always like the loudest or the most opinionated in the classroom, because there were definitely people who were like the Hermiones. But I think, so we would always go home and read the feedback that we received, because we would always get margin notes and feedback letters. And I don't know about you, but I would always read them on the train home. Yes. And I think the people on the train with me would just be like privy to my most unfiltered self, because I would either be giddy because someone really understood what I was trying to do on the page, or be like devastated because they didn't. Or just run the gamut of emotions. And I feel bad for anyone who rode the 2 train with me from 14th Street to 96th in 2017. So shout out to anyone who might have been on those trains. But whenever I would read your feedback letters, it would always just crystallize something thematically that I had not even considered, that would then like change the way that I saw my own character psychology. And it was mind-blowingly necessary for my drafting process. And I know that you're making that face and you probably are going to say humble things, but truly you're the best. And I'm so happy we're here together. We're in this together.
Thank you. I mean, this is too beautiful. I feel we have to, so we do have one more question. Like we have just enough time for one more question, which is like a process question. And I wanted to ask you that myself. What are a few things you need in order to sit down and write? I'm always curious about the methods and rituals of authors.
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, I really struggle with this actually, because I think I go through strange like bursts of different rituals throughout, whether or not I'm revising or drafting. Like when I'm revising, I need a red pen. I need a stack of actual physical paper. I love to sort of like that tactile sensation when I'm revising is really necessary to me. And I'm constantly writing new dialogue in the margins because the dialogue that comes first, I'm never satisfied with. But I think in the drafting, I would love to be someone who could get up and write like 1,000 words in the morning before coffee or, you know, during coffee, but it just never works that way for me. I feel like my most, you know, creative moments come late at night. And I feel like maybe Raven is similar, but maybe not. Yes. So it's sort of like the twilight zone of when I decide, okay, I'm not going to watch TV tonight. I'm going to start writing at like 10 p.m. when the world is quieting down. And then just, there's a moment when you just like kind of look up and realize it's 3 a.m. And those nights haven't happened as often. And I'm being totally candid and vulnerable. They haven't happened in a while because of promoting this book and thinking about this book and just feeling like I can't fully move on into a new project and get really excited and invested in a new project until this one feels like a distant memory. But I think I always need music. I'm one of those writers who can listen to music. And it's like interesting too, because I think some writers can only listen to instrumental music. I can absolutely listen to music with lyrics, and because I kind of just tune the lyrics out, but it's sort of the mood and the voice sort of carries me somewhere. I need an iced dirty chai, which you could probably figure out because I've mentioned it twice in like the short passage that I read. So caffeine, music, late nights, and usually just sort of altered state. I hope that answers your question. I think I need better rituals. I think I need something.
Those are perfect rituals. The rituals are the rituals. They're the ones that work.
We try.
But I think that is actually a place to stop.
I know that thus concludes our evening. Hey, Kay.
What, you didn't want to tell us your rituals, Raven?
Oh, yes, your rituals, Raven. Share.
You thought you were just going to get on out of here?
Do you want to know my ritual? So my ritual, it's similar to Katie. I'm a nighttime girl. I write in bed. I never write in public. I can't really get, to that place that like, I think vulnerable place that I need to get if I'm like in public. So it's usually I'm in bed, it's nighttime. I definitely have music. I always have music actually. And there have been moments where I've played my writing music for other writers and been burned. So I won't.
I will go with you.
I won't share.
And that's why those people didn't write Luster, so it's fine, right?
But I tend to listen to like really, really like high energy music that kind of focuses my my mind. So it tends not to be soft instrumental stuff, but those are my rituals.
Nice. Well, they sound like the Venn diagram is very tight there. Well, so now I want to know, Caitlin, what was the soundtrack for A Novel Obsession? Is there like a Naomi song and a Rosemary song?
It's going to expose me so hard, but I love my sort of angsty boy bands. Yeah. Like I listened to a lot of the 1975, Dermot Kennedy, Oh Wonder, Adele, Bon Iver, like basically get me all the angst and I'm happy. But also, and this is kind of a fun thing to plug, I labored over a playlist that is sort of A Novel Obsession themed that I did create. And as you can find it on Spotify, and it sort of is songs that either I think resonate thematically, like Creep by Radiohead, for example, because Naomi's a big ol' creep. So songs like that, songs like Jealousy, Jealousy by Olivia Rodrigo, which once again, sort of like no explanation needed for the title of that song. So if anyone is interested in a Novel Obsession themed playlist, have at it. It exists on Spotify.
I love that. Thank you both so much. This was great. I love that you two as debut writers got to see each other through this whole journey. That is like so sweet that you have like classmates from your cohort here is just, that's like everything you could hope for in writers' debut. Congratulations, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Very exciting. Caitlin came on into Fort Greene today. to sign copies of the novel Obsession. I don't have my copy here. Caitlin, can you show us your beautiful copy?
Yes, I can.
Look at that book. Don't you want to buy that book?
I know. It's
Look at her.
I have so much respect and gratitude towards the cover designer, Vian Nguyen. She knocked it out of the park. I can take zero credit for this. It was all her.
Well, thank you so much, y'all. And I hope that everyone goes and buys that book. Buy the book.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you to everyone who's here. I see a lot of names of people I love and new names of people that I will surely love. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Raven, for doing this with me.
This was so great. This was so good.
Love you. Thanks again, Kay. Bye, everyone.